Hello!
I was beginning to think that something had happened and I was just off in some land by myself.
Sorry about that. I realized I did not have my mic on.
Oh, well, good times, good times.
Yeah, it's always an adventure around here, right?
I feel so weird because I can't see you on my Zoom screen and it's odd. But I guess I'll just
Yeah.
go hide you off in this corner now.
Sorry about that. Yeah. So here we are. I have switched us from our, I don't know, our duct tape and shoestring, um, sort of stream to my streaming software. So things are a little bit different today. Hopefully it's good. I have all the stats in front of me now, so Jill and I are, we know what's going on.
Well, you do. I have no idea. It's kind of odd because now I can just hear your voice, but I'm watching you in the lag.
Ah, yes. Okay. Well, yeah. Sorry. I guess I can't hold things up to show you, but yeah.
I was gonna say you're gonna have to be prepared now if I'm not reacting to you in real time, other than your voice.
Yeah. Sorry, Robin. You know, the Pixabay is random when I put the thing on, and it's like sometimes it's like a nice upbeat jazzy dinner time music, and sometimes it's like lullaby.
What are those like masks you got going on behind you?
Oh yeah, my Halloween masks. I
was gonna
bought
say,
this.
are those your friends?
Yes. Friends and relatives. Now, I bought it on Etsy like years ago, and every year, sometimes it's my only Halloween decoration.
I don't think I could do anything for Halloween. My mom used to be so crazy into decorating. Oh, speaking of mom, happy heavenly birthday, mom.
Oh.
Um, she used to go all out, and now I do like, you know what I do? I leave my Christmas tree up like all year round. That's what I do. That's how into decorating I am.
Yeah, I'm not, when I was growing up, I used to be really into all the things, but, my mom was and still is. But yeah, I'm just kind of like, here's some confetti. Happy holiday. I do like Halloween, though. Don't get me wrong. I am struggling to figure out my costume for Halloween because Halloween will be a stream day for me. So
Oh, because I was gonna say, where are you gonna be wearing a costume?
here. And the thing is, like, I only need a costume from like chest up. So
That's true. Everything goes with pink PJ pants.
there you go.
Do you guys get trick-or-treaters?
We used to just a handful. We live on a very busy road. And so for the most
Yeah.
part, like we have sidewalks and stuff, but I don't know. I don't feel good about little kids trooping up and down our road. So
Hmm.
last probably 10 years, we just turn the lights out.
Oh,
Sometimes we
don't,
leave entirely and sometimes we just turn the lights out.
yeah, we don't have sidewalks and again a very busy road, so
Yeah.
I haven't had trick-or-treaters since I was like 20. And we lived in a different house on a cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
It's a long time. And now I'm probably too bah humbug about it.
When my son was little, it was fun, because he was trick-or-treating too, and it was always fun to see all the kids in their costumes. And then, I'm just kind of, as he got older, I'm just like, oh, I don't care anymore. Here's a basket of candy, kids. If somebody comes along and dumps it all into their bag, oh well.
I also noticed you got a big booty eagle behind you.
I do. It's been up, but the little frame I have around myself for my usual streams, like you can't see it. The frame covers it up. So, in all its glory, with its little cigar in its mouth.
Yeah, I feel like you're gonna have to like change and move him to the more focal side so that we can really see his booty.
Well, I'm in a position now where I put so many of my quilts in storage that I don't have as huge of a selection right now to just pull and put things up. So I have to be a little bit more strategic about it.
But I bet people in your household are somewhat happy that there's less quilts around.
Oh yeah, yep. And I moved some more stuff today, not to the unit, but just as the things that have gone to the unit have created space, then things that were struggling for space have now moved into that. So yeah, today was a productive day. I got
Oh,
shots
I could
today
not say the
too.
same.
I got shots today, so I can kind of I can't really get my arm off. It hurts so much.
Gotcha.
'Tis the
I did
season.
not do any of that today, although I do have a doctor's appointment tomorrow. But I did finish my reading.
I did too about 15 minutes ago.
Oh, I was a little more on top of it than that. I read, instead of trying to read this all in like one sitting, I read it in chunks because
Yeah, I did that too.
it's not ugh, there. I have a major bone to pick with like publishers
Oh.
making books this size. It's just it's just not conducive to like snugly reading, you know.
No, it's not. But then you know what we'd be complaining about if it wasn't this big, we'd be complaining about how thick the book is and how small the pictures are. So
No, I'm not
it's a
saying I
trade-off.
have a solution. I'm not saying I have a solution. And this is quite like the nightmare of this genre of book because you need the pictures to be, halfway good size to get
Hmm.
the visibility. But yeah, it's just not it's very awkward. It's very awkward. But anywho, um yes, Marrodin, page glare. Totally. I
Yeah,
keep having to
glossy
like,
stuff. Hmm.
yeah, like move my book when I'm in the light and hold it a different way. And that is another challenge of like the glossy pages. These pages are very thick, so I've been like having a hard time grabbing them to like turn and not turn
Yeah,
five at
they
once.
really are. I mean, it's a quality book, but it sounds like Robin. I mean, I'm sure we probably have all bought ours secondhand, and yours stinks. I'm assuming that.
Well,
Yeah.
I think Robin do not like the smell of press because I mean I do. I like book smell. I don't think this one is stinky unless yours came from a very like
Yeah, she says
moldy place.
really ancient old book, and I know sometimes that's like that kind of musty old paper smell.
I love the smell of old book. I love the smell of old book. I love the smell of new book. I smell books. Hi, my name is Jill and I smell books.
Book sniffer. I actually have a patch. I have a patch on one of my bags that says book sniffer.
Yeah, I was gonna say apparently it's like a thing.
It is a thing. Just
Oh.
like people that sniff and squeeze yarn at the yarn store.
Wait, people do that?
Uh-huh.
They sniff and squeeze?
Yes. Oh my gosh. You
What's
didn't know
the
this?
squeezing for?
Like the loftiness. I mean, I guess you'd have to be like a knitter or crocheter to kind of understand, but it's I don't know, it's just like the lofty squishiness of the yarn. You know, like if you pick up a sweater and it's like, oh, so cuddly warm, like cashmere, and you squeeze it and you're just like, oh, it's so lofty. And then you pick up a cotton sweater and you're like, squeeze, squeeze.
All right. Well, the way that you said it though made it sound like they squeeze it to sniff it better. Like they like
Oh,
squeeze
no.
it into their nose.
No, they just squeeze it, kind of rub it against your face.
Okay, that makes a little more sense. Robin,
Yeah.
I'm sorry your book is smelly. That's that's weird. The first thing I would say is like leave it out in like a sunny room, like open.
Yeah, or
And
keep
see
it
if
in
you
a
can
big bag full of like coffee beans or something like that.
Yeah, like the same way you'd kind of think to get like cigarette smell out of textiles. Um,
Spray it with
'Cause
vodka.
I can't say I've ever really come across that. And I have a lot of old books.
I have a couple.
Um,
And typically it is one and it's a great book and I'm like ah. I think it was just it was in with other things that got wet, and it's like even though it itself is not wet, it kind of like it seems like it's soaked up some of that like stinky mildew smell. Yeah.
oh,
So,
Arlene, you still haven't gotten yours yet. Don't worry, we're gonna
ah,
be reading this sucker for like 6 weeks,
rubbing
so
alcohol
you'll have time to
wipes.
catch up.
Oh, that's a good idea. Rubbing alcohol wipes gets rid of some of the moldy, mildewy.
These pages too are pretty hefty pages. They could probably handle it. Some
Yeah.
pages I probably wouldn't do that too, but these feel pretty.
Well, yeah,
I
because
mean,
these
like
are
this
these
is
are
high
glossy.
quality.
Yeah, these are
Yeah.
glossy. You could probably go. Yeah, you wouldn't want to use like a book that was less like didn't have the glossy pages might be a problem, but. Well, anyway, now that our course on de-stinkifying your books is over.
All right. So let me just hand out the assignment for next week. For October 22nd. Oh my God, it's already the middle of the month. We're
We
gonna
might
do
as well.
pages 32 to 67. It's gonna end again in a weird place, but it has to because this first chapter is like 90 something pages long. So, that's what we're doing with that. And then let me share my screen really quick. I don't know how it's gonna look.
We'll find out in a minute.
Um,
Oh, not too
but I
bad.
just Okay. I just want to remind everyone about our calendar because we have Needlework Nights tomorrow where we're talking about tape measures, and I have already done a little cruising online and taken some pictures. I was pulling a bunch out last night. Then Stephanie and I on Thursday are going to Pennsylvania for a few days to see some exhibits and do some quilt mingling, and our friend Barb Garrett's doing a turning, excuse me, at the Schwenkfelder that we're going to see. So we're going to be doing stuff there. We're going to try on the 20th to stream at 7 p.m. Eastern from our Airbnb. So I don't see any reason right now why that shouldn't work, but just keep your fingers crossed that that works. If for some reason we get there and we find out the internet stinks, you'll see a notice on social media that says that we're not going to be able to do that, but we're going to try. So there's that. Then we go home on Monday and Steph is gonna try to make it in time for her regular stream, and then we go back to the regular world.
Business as
And
usual.
yeah, and then just an extra notice. Because I've already had someone ask me, oh, where did my life go here? Okay, I've already had someone ask me about our next book. We're not gonna have a next book for this year. This is gonna be our last book for the year. And then once this book is done in November, we're gonna head off the rest of the year with just other things on Tuesday. We're just gonna do, quilt exhibits and discussions about other things, and we're not going away. We're just not going to do another book, and we're just going to take a little break and talk about things we want to do for next year.
Yeah. And I'm
And then
sure.
November is our anniversary too.
Yes, we're working on that now.
Mm-hmm. All right. So let's get into this.
Yeah.
Initial feelings.
So a couple things. So first of all, oh, by the way, my book is signed by Marsha MacDowell. Um,
Oh, I didn't even check, but I don't think mine is.
yeah,
No, mine is not.
I feel like about half of my books are signed by their authors, and I'm just like, oh, I feel bad because it's like this one's dedicated. This was actually
Oh.
dedicated to the person. So, like, well, I feel bad that but it's in good hands, and I appreciate it. So, this was written in 1997.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some things have changed a little bit, but I mean, I think the history stands, which it's a heartbreaking history. I mean, it's so much of some of the books we've already read, Soft Covers for Hard Times, Legacy. We've looked at, Hard Times Quilting, and this is yet another story of Hard Times Quilting. I was really pleased to see that there's some more modern stuff. It's not just about historical quilts. I do know, and a mutual friend of ours, I don't know if she sent it to you as well, but sent an article about some of the kind of modern indigenous stance on some of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And some people, some groups are kind of pushing away from things like quilting because they're not. It is not a traditional craft for Indigenous people in this country, and I but it's just North America, period. And they're kind of pushing that away in favor of bringing back and uplifting the traditional crafts versus
Mm-hmm.
something like this that's not traditional. So, I think there is some of that going on today, and but I think that quilts still remain very important. In some places, and I mean just quilters in general. I mean, there's certainly not as many Native Americans as there are other other groups in the United States, but I would say that the people who are quilters, they're quilters for life. So that there's that. I don't know, what were your impressions?
So I'm coming to this book from an interesting perspective because obviously I am a quilter and I enjoy quilt history and things like that. But I've also worked with a Native group. When I was in my undergraduate degree, which is in anthropology, I was training in archaeology, and we did our dig with the Eastern Pequot Tribal Nation in North Stonington, Connecticut. And that field school works very closely with the tribe. We have tribal elders on site. We pay tribal interns to work with us. And we even got to go, and they invited us to their annual powwow, which was very interesting. I have pictures if we ever want to look at them. Um, and also from the perspective of growing up, born and raised in Natick, Massachusetts, there are sites around town because Natick was used as, quote, an Indian praying town. And
What does that mean?
it's a town that would be used um as almost like she keeps talking in here in this first chapter about how missions
Mm-hmm.
uh were how indigenous peoples were learning to quilt. That was the primary way that this was passed on. And what I'm going to say is going to offend people, but I'm coming at this comment from someone who has a graduate degree in religion. Uh, the only groups really that run missions are Christian groups,
Right.
and missions are a form of colonization.
Oh, yeah.
They go and teach things like they say reading and religion and things to groups that did not need them. Um, and while it there isn't so far, at least in this book, a lot of dissent being shown
Mm-hmm.
for that. There's also the mention in here of like Indian children's schools and things. And
Right.
from recent news, in the last so many years, we know more about that history than we were taught before that. Um, it's it's difficult to, and I'm not blaming this on the author at all. I don't think the author at all is romanticizing, but I worry
Right.
about people that read this and then romanticize, oh, these great missions that we're teaching and we're then that's not entirely true. Remember, the whole point of things like that and things like children's Indian schools are to erase an identity and replace it with something else.
Yes.
So, it's a little awkward. It feels a little awkward for me,
Mm-hmm.
just because obviously there's not enough room in here for them to like bring in all of that context. Like she's bringing in context for sure, but she's assuming a level of knowledge already,
Mm-hmm.
you know, about the history, which I'm not saying that's a bad thing, um, but it feels a little awkward. I will say the one thing I am really pleased about is that it's mentioned on numerous different pages how different groups, and I'm thrilled she's talking about tons of different groups,
Right.
um, used their historic symbols and things for their groups and their clans and their
Yeah.
tribes and worked that in. And we see that historically across all different kinds of cultures that become colonized, ways that they keep their identity somehow surviving amongst that oppression.
Mm-hmm.
So those are my initial thoughts. I know it's kind of deep for just getting going, but there's a
Yeah.
lot of hmm, you know.
Right. Yeah. I knew this was going to be kind of a deep one. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I almost feel like, wow, we've really, from a book club standpoint, we've really dragged our friends through some tragedy through, some of the books that we've been reading.
You
But
know something? We can't be any more tragic than Murder at the Quilt Show. Okay.
this is true. Yes, that was a tragic piece of writing. But the thing is, I think these stories are really important, and the context is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, Native American. Like, I mean, I know some Native Americans. I've I grew up under that. Oh, your great 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 grandmother was an Indian princess. Well, okay. My DNA ancestry and 23andMe say something different. There is no Native American history here. And it kind of like makes me like my stomach queasy when I think about that kind of stuff. There's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that like you're saying, like this romanticism of, the cowboys and the Indians and all that stuff. And the my dad's family is from Cherokee country in North Carolina. And yeah, that's where all those stories came from. And I was like, how about not denigrating the indigenous people by saying that they're related to us? Because yeah, our ancestors were not necessarily great people. They were Scottish. They were Scottish criminals that came here. So
Oh,
they did not intermarry. Anyway, that's the side thing. So yeah, it is. There's a lot of stuff here. Like I kind of recognize some of the things that she's talking about and some of the things that the women she interviewed were saying, but also some stuff in here I was like, oh, okay, wow. Also, I'm kind of kicking myself because in college, I think I read a book about, it's called like 500 tribes or something like that, and it goes through kind of explaining like, Native Americans across the United States and North America and, Canada, they are not all one group. And, there's the tribes, and then within the tribes, there's clans. And there is a lot of, because of the intertribal wars over millennia, you've got a lot of like kind of, I guess what I'm trying to say is for a white person, it's sometimes hard to navigate, like, when people talk about their affiliation, without having that spelled out for you. And I'll be honest with you, here in Maryland, the Piscataway are the primary, tribal history here. And I think there's a couple of other groups, but they're Algonquin, which is the Eastern Seaboard. And reading about their history, I guess it's Maryland Indian Affairs, or I can't remember what the group is that kind of puts together all this information, but I still struggled reading their information to understand like what the breakdown was. So it's very complex, and I think that that gets super glossed over, when you hear stories. And I guess to bring it back to quilting, I was very pleased to see that she was putting in tribal affiliation with their names. And she said, I'm not going to get down this rabbit hole of trying to, manage, I guess, where you've got two different tribal affiliations, or you've got some, I think it's kind of geographic affiliations. I think she was basically saying, like, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but, the person's primary tribal affiliation is what you're going to see in this book. And, I think that's something that was not really necessarily happening until recently in the world of arts. I think about, 10, 15 years ago going to, any kind of like art exhibit or historical materials, and you kind of just got this like, oh, these are Navajo, or, these are from Indians out west. And it was like, it like you're saying, like it's erasing the people. And so I was really pleased to see that. So I really think that from that perspective, Marsha MacDowell was kind of ahead of the times, because I don't know that that necessarily in 97 was, putting tribal affiliation out there. But yeah, I think what struck me most about this beginning section, she does bounce around a little bit in this beginning section, and I'm just looking at that as just, here's our, what's the word I'm looking for? Like our backstory, our exposition here. But like the hard luck stories are, I'm sitting here thinking, some of the stuff we read in Legacy might be, equivalent. Certainly the stories we hear about enslaved Americans and people, formerly enslaved people trying to get things together on their own, and the terrible conditions they lived in. We're seeing a lot of that here again. And again, it's a very painful reminder of the history of this country. Bottom line. So, yeah. But I guess, again, what I would say that, not to knock the people today that are kind of pushing these sort of colonial crafts aside. I think it is so very cool to see what people, recognizing like, oh, quilts are kind of a good thing. You know, they keep us warm. And seeing what they did, like you're saying, to bring their own personal symbolism, their own community symbolism. You know, I mean, these are the things that we see in quilts all the time, and that they tell the story. You know,
Yeah, I
so
have to say, I it makes me, at the time that I was doing my archaeology field school, there was another field school happening, I don't know, 10 miles away or something like that. That was part of a different uh they were working on a different reservation. But the nice thing is that all these professors running this were all tied into to each other. And we got to go at the Foxwoods Casino in Connecticut. If anyone's in Connecticut, I don't care about the casino, but if you go to that reservation area, there is a big museum it's gorgeous state of the art museum, and it's for the Mashantucket Pequot Indian tribe. It's fabulous. At the time that we went, the guy that ran it was, I believe his name was Kevin McBride. I think that was his name. He was a friend of our professors. We got to go behind the scenes.
oh, nice.
And yeah, we got to go into storage and stuff. At that time, I was very deep into studying religion and things like that. And it's funny, I asked him just like, "Hey, Kevin, can we go in the back?" And he was like, "What do you want to see?" And he was, and a friend of mine was like, "She's really interested in religion." And he was like, "Oh, I've got a couple of Bibles." And half of me was like, "Really? I'm at this big state of the art native museum to see Bibles." Anywho, we go in the back, we see a bunch of cool stuff. I wasn't into quilts at the time. So it never crossed my mind about anything textile related or anything like that. So it makes, I don't think he's still there at the time. He probably would be retired by now, but it bums me out that like I can't necessarily go back and be like, "Can you guys get me in the back for quilts?" You know, but if you guys are there, that museum is fantastic, and it talks about real history, from the perspective of the indigenous culture there. And it's amazing. I don't care about the casino. Unless you want to win and share money, I don't care. Um, but I've considered now reading this, I'm like, maybe I should go back over there and see if they have stuff. Because if any museum around I feel like is gonna have stuff, it would be them.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, but I can
Well,
tell you that on
maybe.
our dig, we did find scissors. Like little small, like
Really
textile related scissors.
interesting. Yeah, I was gonna say though. I mean, yeah, maybe they have quilts, but also maybe they don't because I mean, in here, what all the ladies are saying is, well, you know, first of all, we made these like I mean, like so many of the stories we hear, like we never considered these to be anything other than things to keep us warm. When
Hmm.
the snow comes in through the cracks in our
Oh
cabin,
my God.
these are the quilts that keep us from freezing to death. Um, and then I noticed some of the women had said using making quilts out of the scraps of clothing certainly,
Hmm.
but then also the women that do the ribbon work, like the ribbon dresses
Hmm.
and stuff, like it's their extra scraps that they've used, and it's they have that it's that sense of like it's sentimental, you don't want to let it go. So I feel like probably a lot of quilts in Native American groups kind of stayed within their family or their community maybe. um
Hmm.
I don't know. I mean, it's since that's not far for you, let me know. Let me know when you get
Yeah.
back.
Well, it's funny. Half of me has thought like maybe I should reach out to my professor, who's still a professor at UMass Boston, and ask him like, "Hey, you know anything about any of this? Like, you got any like resources or something?" Because again, it's not something that ever came up.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
other than I do remember when we went to the powwow, and again, I do have some pictures. One of the dances that we saw was they had uh probably what we would call blankets. And it's called like like the blanket dance. And at the time we were watching one of the tribal interns um dance, and she had told us at the end of the dance, historically the young woman dancing would go when she was done, and she had her blanket like wrapped around her, and they kind of, move it around them, and they would go down to some young man sitting around the end of the circle and like lay their blanket in front of them as like a symbol of this is the man I want to marry kind of scenario.
Yeah, I think I've heard a story similar to that. Yeah.
But I don't remember, and I even like went through and like looked at the pictures again. I don't remember seeing anything like quilts. That's not to say that I didn't. I just don't recall. It was 2011. Come on. That was a little bit ago.
I'll cut you some slack, but yeah.
But the cool thing is that Michigan State University Museum apparently has a lot of stuff.
Yes, I noticed them cropping up and when I was reading the captions on stuff. So, yeah,
Michigan, they got a lot of stuff.
Michigan is somewhere we need to go because there is, and actually I do know, I want to say one of the people, I don't know if she's curatorial or what she is with Michigan State, she is an AQSG member. She helped me out big time when I was doing my Dr. Dunton research. So I need to like, hi, can we come visit?
Yeah, because Michigan State, whose stuff again do they have? Mary Schaefer's?
I'm trying to maybe Mary Schaefer's, but definitely Questa Benberry's stuff is there. Gladys Marie Fry, she's from here in Maryland. Her stuff is there.
I think it's Mary Schaefer. I think a lot of her collection went there.
Yeah, there's a number of quilters. If they're not at the Dolph Briscoe Center in Austin, they're in Michigan. So
I thought Questa Benberry was at Briscoe.
No, Joyce Gross is at the Briscoe.
Oh, okay. I can't keep it straight, but I mean, right in the intro, it makes sense when it says on page IX that the Michigan State University Museum did native quilting research and exhibition project that they began in 1984.
Yeah,
I think that was really ahead of the time.
Yeah,
we're talking about this being published in the 90s and the way that they're doing it being rather progressive for the time period. But in 84, I mean, I'm thrilled that there was a group of people like that.
I mean, 84, we're probably talking about people that are like, I mean, it's like totally like obnoxious, stereotypical stuff about Native Americans. I mean, honestly, the Washington Commanders just changed their name like mid-pandemic. So, we've got this stuff that just continues to go. So yes, anything that was being done in the 80s and the 90s, I think is very progressive. Still not enough though. I wanted to point out this portrait of these two men.
You're gonna have to tell me what it is because I can't see it.
I'm sorry. On page 4, it's the two men on page 4. It's the historical picture. Yeah, and it's like the traditional Indian. The quilt that the one man is wrapped in. I'm so curious about that because I mean, typically these photographs, he would, it's called a robe, and typically it would have been like a wool blanket. And the tiny little bit of research that I've done about the robes is not necessarily, this is terrible, not necessarily to learn about the indigenous people in the robes, but because I have a namesake that made the robes. So my maiden name is Capps. Joseph Capps and Sons made trade blankets. Yeah, and his blankets were like in the Buffalo Bill, the show, whatever that thing was called. And like they endorsed him and stuff. So but it's really, but when you see pictures like this one, obviously there's this fake background with teepees in the back. And I mean, these gentlemen are probably, I don't think it says anything about, Arapaho. But you kind of like this touristy stuff where it's like, okay, you guys are going to get in front of this picture. Never mind if your affiliation, if your tribe used teepees or not. We think of Indians as having teepees. So you're going to stand in front of these pictures of teepees. And, I mean, like, this kind of stuff, I mean, it's like, it's gross. But, from the historical perspective and looking at this, I'm kind of like, why a quilt? Is it just what was there? And they went, that looks enough like one of your trade blankets. We'll grab that. you know, I would love to
Mhm.
know the stories behind this. I mean, as you know, they are not good stories, but I think it's important to know, the whole
Well, and
story.
right, and that's what I was talking about is like I'm bummed that it's glossed over, but on the flip
Hmm.
side, she doesn't have enough room
Yeah.
to put all of that context in
Right.
here.
Well, yeah, and I think what you were
Um,
saying is there's a little bit of assumption that you kind of already maybe know, a
mhm.
little bit of history in that you can read between the lines as you read this stuff. um, and I mean, I think that the schools. Well, I mean, we haven't gotten very far, so I don't know. Maybe we'll get there, but like, yes, the schools. I mean, don't get me started. I listened to a podcast. Well, I've listened to two podcasts that just were just devastated me. And I'm like,
Mhm.
this is almost in my lifetime. Not quite. Didn't quite happen. I wasn't born yet, but almost in my lifetime. And I'm just like, this is horrible. Like, what in the absolute hell? um, anyway, step off the soapbox. Let's see.
Well,
What?
in the very, first pages here, where she mentions a lot about uh, religious missions of the
Mm-hmm.
Christian variety playing the biggest role in Indigenous people learning to quilt, which
Mm-hmm.
again, there's a lot of romanticism around, religious missions and things. Um, and they really, if when we consider the fact that really Christianity is the only religion that proselytizes,
Yeah.
and is the only religion that has touched every single people of the entire world. And there is a reason to do that, and that reason is colonization. And I'm sorry if that's upsetting. That's just the historical perspective. It's
Well,
not
but
too.
I mean, that was the intent.
I know, and
It
but people get upset
Right. Well, I
because
mean,
they
the
think
thing
I'm
is, I mean,
dragging on their
yes,
faith.
you have to acknowledge the intent was not probably not. I mean, we look at it from today's lens, and we're like, "Ew, what these people like? How dare?" But from their perspective, they're looking at it as like, "Well, religion's good, and God is good, and Christianity is the way, and these people, I'm saving people's souls." Like that's the perspective they were coming from, and they meant no harm, or they thought they meant no harm. But they also looked at people as like, okay, you're not Christian, and your community doesn't do things the way we do, therefore you're lesser or you're more primitive, so we need to get you up to this level. Like that, I think that's the mindset. And
Definitely of those probably on the ground, because the thing is
yeah.
we still have them now. Jenny Doan of Missouri Star Quilt Company is posting left and right all over on a mission that she's on right now.
I didn't know.
Um, yep. And while that may be the feeling of people on the ground, um, we know historically that those in charge of the organized part of things, that colonization, spreading was always the goal. And we know now historically, since missions have been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years, um, how harmful they actually really are. And again, I'm not
Yeah.
trying to knock on anybody's faith. Missions are a very particular part of um, organized religion, not necessarily
Well,
inner faith.
yeah. Today
Um,
missions are a very important part of one particular religion. Um, I mean, we're not going to go there because I mean, I have the utmost respect for people's faiths, but I absolutely agree with you. The harm that can be done by trying to push your beliefs and your faith on other people. Faith is faith. And got to remember
well,
that.
and missions to at this particular point in time and in this place is how we get to Indian schools for children.
Yeah. Yeah.
They start out as mission schools, and we know now, it's not that we didn't know before, but like we have been greeted with undeniable evidence of just how atrociously harmful those places were.
Yeah.
If it wasn't enough already that places like that were used to erase people's identities. And we know that from plenty of other cultures too, where things like that have happened. and in the line of history that is just yucky.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
So, if I may,
if you may,
page 10.
page 10.
So, I mean, and again, this is part of all of that, the attitudes, I'm guessing. So down here in the last full paragraph, it says in Mendocino County, California. So it says it was also established by this time that a good basket weaver made a good quilt maker. Now there is a reference also to basket making in a few pages. But I was like, well, who came up with that? And I just noticed, I didn't notice it earlier, there is a footnote. So let us see where that came from.
While you're looking for that, Robin said, growing up in California and going on many school trips to all kinds of missions. Wow, you did that in a public school or a Catholic school? Even way back then, I didn't like the idea of what missionaries did to people.
Yeah.
I have to say, I wasn't good about reading the notes this time around.
Yeah, I wasn't either. So yes, this is coming from Sandra Metzler Smith, Quilts and Permaculture Uncoverings, 1980. So I guess we'd have to look and see where she got that. Because I mean, again, it's interesting. Like I'm thinking like, okay, so basket makers probably have like a mental picture if they didn't have some type of drawing. But I'm thinking like a lot of times cultures that have a native craft, it's the memory of the pattern, it's not written down, it's in their head, and sometimes there will be things that are kind of like a reference tool or something, but for the most part I'm guessing that basket weavers, they have the design in their head. So that makes sense to me that, okay, if you can envision this design and how it goes into the three-dimensional structure of a basket, then you should have no problem thinking about piecing and the design that would go into a quilt. So that and from that perspective, it makes sense to me. But I'm just like, well, how about anybody who has good design fundamentals, whether they think they make baskets or they do something else? Like, I don't know. It's just one of those things.
Well, I mean, a comment like that would make me question things like, so did you guys purposely seek out the basket makers in certain tribes to kind of remove maybe their basket making skills and hone it into something else?
Or were people that made baskets just the ones that are like, hey, this is kind of like basket weaving, it's a different kind of fiber? I don't know. I mean, there could be a harmful aspect about that, and there could be just a completely benign aspect of that.
Basket weavers tended to take tended to like take on quilting more enjoyably than others.
Maybe.
That's what
maybe.
I mean when I'm saying like sometimes the wording without certain context, it makes you wonder where someone's imagination will go with, again, that romanticizing or
Well, I mean, a perfect example would be the Tennessee Valley quilts, the Tennessee Valley Authority quilts that we looked at with Mary Kay's book. And the one particular quilt, which is often known as the lazy man quilt, in African American quilt circles, but I think it's been the one version of it's been renamed the Tennessee Valley Authority quilt. But you and I came up with like a completely different mindset about it until we read the history of it. And so, I mean, again, like you're saying, it's this context, and then, you've got comments like, oh, basket makers make good quilt makers. Like, exactly where is that coming from? Like, exactly, is that something that people are saying themselves? Like, yeah, the people in our community who were traditionally basket makers, they really took to quilting.
Yeah, or was that like a Eurocentric kind of projection? Onto.
So on the same page, but the next column, right in the middle, it talks about an 1894 Scrivener's article. Author Fanny Bergen reports Reverend, was it I. Dorsey or J. Dorsey, of the Bureau of Ethnology. Now, I meant to look this up and I completely forgot. I read the other day. Do you know anything about the Bureau of Ethnology? It sounds awful. I mean,
I've heard of it. I feel like in another anthropology course of some kind, it was discussed.
Yeah. I really did wonder about that. I'm kind so the like sort of the things that I noted in here kind of just all over the place.
Oh
But
yeah, mine too.
so these two quilts that are on page 11, at first glance, they are so very like the bottom one is like a sampler. Well, they're calling it a friendship quilt, but it's a sampler. And then the top one is beautiful tulip quilt. The tulip quilt, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so Pennsylvania Dutch, right? But then there's that strip across one end of it, and it's kind of, I kind of looked, I was like, is that the foot of the bed or is that the head of the bed? I'm not sure.
I know, or is it the pillow tuck?
Well, but when you look at it, like if you turn your book, it makes sense to me that it's the foot of the bed because of the way the birds are oriented.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was like, oh, that's so cool because this is this tulip design. If you put your hand over that border piece, the tulip design could have come out of any Pennsylvania Dutch, quilter's work. But then you look at that strip there with the birds, and I'm assuming they're clouds, or maybe, I don't know, maybe the green ones are supposed to be like greenery. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the symbolism is.
Did you put highlighter over your quilt?
Oh no, it's my tape. It's the highlight tape.
I was like, are you drawing on the quilt?
No, it's the highlighter tape. But yeah, again, I'm not sure what it is, what those symbols are other than the birds. But that is like, that's bringing in the, your own symbolism to add to this, right? I think it's the foot. Yeah, Robin agreed with that's the foot. I just the way that the birds are oriented, it makes the most sense to me. And then the friendship quilt, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, like all of these blocks you very well could see in, maybe not a Baltimore album quilt because it's not quite that style, but, some of these sampler quilts from, the late 19th century that we've seen, all over the East Coast. It could very easily be one of those, but there's something a little bit different about it. And I kept thinking, like, what is it? Is it the lines are thinner? I can't quite put my finger on it. It does just have a different style about it, and I can't quite put my finger on it. But it's just interesting to me, and I kind of wondered about some of the things in this. Is there some symbology that we're not privy to, just because we don't know about this community? And I think this says Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Cherokee. Yeah, so it's things like this where I'd be like, were they the makers or makers, were they really just inspired by existing quilts and thought the flora and the fauna seemed to be a big deal, right? And so they were using the flora, these floral designs that they had seen before, or have they infused some kind of like their own symbology in with these? I don't know. Although some of the other quilts we get to, we do know.
The block on that friendship quilt in the upper left-hand corner, the figures in that block give me the Bible quilt vibes.
Yeah.
The way that those figures are created.
And it's assuming that's supposed to be a weeping willow. I mean, it's some sort of tree, obviously, but I'm assuming that maybe it's a weeping willow. And I mean, you see that in quilts of the 1800s.
And interestingly enough, people, if anyone's watching in Oklahoma, both of these quilts are found at the Oklahoma Historical Society. Yeah. So let this be a lesson to you. Don't knock your local historical societies. We always seem to forget about them because they tend to be really small institutions and usually have very, very limited hours. They're usually run by volunteers and stuff. But I'll tell you, since we started reading, since we started engaging with AQSG and meeting other nerdy people, I have seen more quilts at historical societies than I have at quilt museums. We have seen so many of them. So.
And it's funny how, the historical societies often, the Maryland Historical Society is not a good example of this because they are kind of big. The state Historical Society, they're their own big museum. But the smaller, like in here where I am, they're counties, they're county historical societies, and they're even if they might have they're more of a shoestring operation because they're volunteers and that kind of thing. they're actually a little bit more accessible, I think, than museums, because you can kind of say, like, you can kind of call them up and say, hey, here's what I'm working on. And they'll, sure, we'll pull that stuff out for you. Can you come this weekend? So they're a little bit more accessible, I think. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, never discount those.
No, we should always be checking on our historical societies. Um, I if we just go on to like the next page, were you done?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I was just kind of going through what I had highlighted.
Yeah, the pictorial quilt on 13. This to me would be the prime example of, making sure that you're using this colonial medium to tell your stories,
Yes.
kind of a thing. And the caption here is, the symbols and figures on this quilt are believed to tell the story of the conflict between native peoples and white men. In addition, they show representations of everyday activities. A tomahawk above a peace pipe in the upper left corner, and vice versa in the lower right, are symbols, respectfully, of war and peace. Like, I feel like this quilt has to be, let's see, oh, it's a private collection. I was gonna say, like, this thing has to be online somewhere. And this is circa 1915, by the way.
Yeah.
Where we can really kind of look at this up close.
Yeah, I'm not sure if if I've seen this quilt in another book, or if I'm just remembering from seeing it in this book. I can't remember. But yeah, it's a very iconic imagery, I think. And it does tell, I mean, from the perspective of a story quilt or a pictorial quilt, absolutely it tells everything it needs to tell. One thing in here I wanted to point out, though, and this is just me being like a clown. I don't know if I can hold it up close enough to the camera, but if you look at the bottom row of images, right in the middle, there's a yellow animal.
It's a kangaroo?
Yes. I'm like, wait a minute now. What is that animal? Why does it look like a kangaroo?
I mean, there's even like what looks like a bison. Yeah, this is, I mean, I guess we could take like a decent like photo with like a phone.
Yeah, I think the current owner is a grandson of the maker, Charles Burton Thompson. It's interesting. There's this quote here. It says, grandmother asked Rebecca why she had the squaw riding and the brave walking when Indians usually had it working the other way. That's interesting to me. And I mean, because it's many, this terrible blanket statement, but I would say many tribal, like their culture, what's the word I'm looking for? Like their provenance, they're matrilineal, right? Like things are coming down through your mother, which, honestly, I mean, yes, I'm a big feminist, but step aside from that, you kind of often wonder why things are not more matrilineal. Because guess what? Without the womb, none of us would exist. So you would think that matrilineal is very important. Whereas,
Well, I mean, lots of cultures that aren't white European cultures are matrilineal. Like, just look at Judaism. That passes through the mother.
Yes. Well, yes.
So... and what I also think is very interesting is because we've definitely seen in some of our other books other quilts made by oppressed societies, and I find it interesting that some of their most prolific makings are pictorial, and I wonder if we're, especially when we're dealing with people, obviously, where English is not their native language and a new language is literally kind of being forced on them. So obviously they're not going to be as articulate as a native speaker. And why would they even want to speak English? You know what I mean? So like, I feel like pictorial would really be the way to really like convey in a more articulate manner than words, the story of being oppressed, of being...
Yes, and also if your community does not have a written tradition, if all of your traditions are oral tradition, then pictures make more sense. Even if you do have a formalized and, extensive language, if it doesn't have a written aspect to it, or doesn't have an extensive written aspect to it. Yeah.
Well, and also the way to get your story across to basically almost anyone regardless of any language barrier.
Yes, pictures.
Yeah, the same way as like, people would be like, "Oh my God, I love math because it's universal." Like everyone can converse in math or science or like I find this so interesting just because in grad school I did a lot of work related to how people's minds pictorially conceptualize things like Bible readings. Like people that read and they see images in their head. Where do they get those images and how do they decide that whatever words they're reading invoke certain images? So that's why I'm like, oh my God, look, pictures.
That was an interesting thing to study. My son and I were actually having a conversation about like mental imagery the other day. It's kind of interesting.
It was very interesting. The part of my premise was, I think that's why children are shown picture books when they're kids, is you're creating this visual vocabulary bank in your head. And I had even done a little experiment with an undergraduate class that I was taking as a graduate student with like a graduate component, and one of the days like I had to teach the class. And I made up a word and I was like, draw that word for me, whatever comes to mind. And everything was completely different because you don't have some kind of
frame of reference, yeah,
visual component to put to that word.
Yeah.
So it was basically kind of how you can control how people take things in based on what kind of images they're fed at a certain point in time.
Yeah.
So maybe a kangaroo means something else.
My guess is it's some other kind of animal that just came out looking like a kangaroo, Wasn't from Harriet Powers' quilt Bets, wasn't I'm trying to remember, wasn't she called an aardvark for a while until I found out she was a pig?
Yeah, and an independent hog.
A very independent hog. All right, so page 14, where they're talking about the quilting parties. I thought this was interesting because and the charming piece about, the children could not go to bed until they'd filled their shoes with cotton seeds. I thought that was funny. But these ideas of quilting parties, this was something that, early 20th century, mid 20th century, a lot of questions were being asked about quilting parties because, was it Harriet Beecher Stowe? Or at the, was it the minister, the wooing of the minister, something like that. She talks about a party. And then there's that really famous, like 18th century picture of a quilting party. Mm-hmm. But when I've looked at the research and the writing of people in the early 20th century, Dr. Dunton, Francis Peto, like Florence Peto, all those people, they're kind of like, we're always asking around, did you do quilting parties? Did your family do quilting parties? Like we're trying to figure out if they're real. And to me, it's like, well, were you talking to any people like formerly enslaved people or any people who were Native American? Because I'm looking here going like, apparently they did some quilting parties here and there.
Yeah.
So that was kind of interesting to me. And then the other thing on page 15 at the very, very first paragraph, it says, while the frequency of such quilting parties is not known, right? The following account by a former slave implies quilting promoted interracial and interethnic mingling. I was like, oh, this is really interesting. Yeah.
Hi, Druid.
Hey, Druid. How are you, lady?
I also like, what was I just thinking about? Darn it. I lost it.
Well, while you think about that, moving on. So, page 16, down towards the bottom, second to the last paragraph. Because they did not have irons, they heated metal spoons.
That was, oh my God.
First of all, like, oh my God, how heartbreaking, but also, oh my gosh, how ingenious.
Yeah, I was like, oh my goodness, that's brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also on the facing page on 17, there's the quote that's moving over into page 17 right at the bottom. She talks about, let's see, who is this? This is Ray Jean Walking Eagle, I think. This is her quote. She says, the family jokes about having only 25 stitches per inch. That's insane.
Is that possible?
Seriously, I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah, I don't think that's possible.
I think if you have no batting, and you're stitching on like gossamer butterfly wing silk, perhaps you can get 25 stitches per inch. But like in a quilt,
I wonder, sorry everybody, I'm having like a throat tickle. I wonder if like that was just like they were just being flippant and like that was just like a
oh
joke
yeah, oh
or
absolutely, it is a joke. I mean, they're basically saying like, oh, where are
I
your
hope
25?
so.
Yeah, they're basically saying like, where are your 25 stitches per inch, you know? I mean, it's impossible.
Because I was
is
gonna
what they're
say,
saying.
well, like the most I've seen is like 10 to 12.
Yeah, like, so I think that if I remember when my mom was first, well, not first, I was too little when she was first quilting, but kind of in her mid quilting career, when she was hand quilting, it was always like you were striving for 16. You know, 16.
I don't think I've ever even seen 16.
It's difficult. It's near impossible,
Yeah,
especially if you're going to do like a real quilt, not a coverlet, but top, back, and batting. Certainly handmade batting. You can get very, very thin. And so, yeah. Mm-hmm. And those really soft, like this quilt is possibly sack fabric. It's very soft. Yeah, you can get some like pretty incredible stitches per inch if you have experience, but 25. And that's the thing. It says it's coming from a Smithsonian Magazine article talked about good quilts having 25 stitches per inch. And so that's why the family's joking about it. And I'm like, because it's not possible. It's some BS story that somebody told through Smithsonian Magazine.
Well, and you know what? I had written down the same thing. And you know what irked me about it is we have seen now on more than one occasion in our readings and things where the Smithsonian's effed up.
Well, yes.
They have I've even seen recently they posted crap about Underground Railroad quilts recently, and I was just like, really? You're supposed to be one of the premier institutions in the country, and you're still going to perpetuate.
Well, they have a very fraught history.
Oh, I know.
So
that's
yeah, I won't digress, but yeah, they have a very fraught history. So it honestly, it's not a surprise to me when something like that comes up. I'll just be like, Smithsonian.
Well, that's why I want to be like, get your shit together, okay? Like, come on.
So, this quilt, which is, it's shown, pieces of it are shown a couple times. I love this because there's so much Ellie Walker fabric in there. Mm-hmm. And I love the fact that it was made over a course of time so that you could definitely see this like real delineation from, you know, how these pieces came together. Dewhurt said 25 stitches per inch is a perforation. Yeah! Like, you want to just tear your quilt into strips with those 25 stitches per inch.
No, true story.
So can we talk about the tobacco bags on page 19? So first of all, Mary's husband smokes about 430 bags of tobacco a year. Mary's husband probably died of lung cancer, and I wonder how much money he was paying for all that tobacco. Good Lord.
Well, remember, that tobacco was far better than what we
Yes,
would have been.
I realize the man was not like, you know, smoking Cool 100s, but...
And also, I'm pretty sure, like, wasn't those tobacco bags like this big?
Yes.
Like, I don't think they weren't huge.
Yeah, but
I was
still...
originally thinking like Crown Royal bag type.
Right, no, there are small bags, but still, I mean, if you think about, like, I always think about the, like, tobacco pouches and, you know, the unit, I guess, of tobacco is like Big League Chew. If you've ever bought a pouch of Big League Chew...
I can't say that I have, Stephanie.
I have. See, my uncle was a baseball player, and he played for the Texas Rangers, and he was a dipper, which is disgusting. But when I was a kid, when I was little, I was always like, I want to be just like him. So I would get Big League Chew, and you know what Big League Chew looks like. It's like a big handful of like gum strips, and I would just like stuff it in my face.
Martin was saying about the 400 and something things of tobacco. He was part Shinny.
Yes, exactly. Perhaps that was his name.
And also with the 25 stitches, she said apocryphal 25 stitches per inch.
There you go. Exactly. But so 430 bags, I mean, across 52 weeks. Like, I did not do the math, but I mean, that's more than a bag a day. That's more than a bag a day. And I mean, I don't know how many cigarettes could you roll. See, like this is definitely something that we like have to figure out. Like how many cigarettes could you get out of that bag? And
I guess, does it say specific? I remember, does it say specifically cigarettes or was it a pipe?
I think it said he rolled his own. So,
Yeah,
oh
I
no,
guess
men
it's
roll
about
their own.
rolling.
Men roll their own. Um,
But it might have been rolling more like cigar size
yeah,
instead
and
of
it
like
also could be
cigarette
the kind
size.
of thing like you're shooting the breeze with the guys and you roll cigarettes for everybody from your tobacco pouch. It's not necessarily you're smoking them all yourself, but I still am just like, that's just a lot of smoking. Just a lot of smoking. But the fact that, so she says 300 to 500 of the sacks could make one top. So, I mean, they are small. It is a small
Yeah.
thing. But I just reading the details of how, she'd pull out the drawstrings and unravel the stitching and wash it all. And I mean, that's just so. I mean, and we've heard those stories like from about feed sacks and other types of reclaimed textiles, but it's just so interesting to me to like that meticulousness. You kind of
Of
wonder
using
like,
every inch of thread.
yeah, and you like what kind of like I think about her process like every time. Well, my gosh, it was multiple bags a week. It was like, oh, here's this week's 100. Like did she do them in batches? Did she, because I mean that like pulling all that stuff apart is not like that takes you some time. So kind of wonder like just like combing or carding cotton batting, is that something that she would have just done on her, you know, when she had a few minutes to just
Well,
unravel and all that stuff.
yeah, the innovativeness, like the in the very next column there, Barbara, would it be like Taislayer?
Taylor.
She writes, my mother made quilts, but I wouldn't exactly call them quilts. My dad was an upholsterer, and they would always send samples up from Grand Rapids. This is Michigan's Upper Peninsula she's in. They were oblong, probably a foot by a foot and a half. Some were velvets, which was nice, but mostly they were rough stuff, and a lot of them were sprayed on the back with a rubber cement type stuff. She sewed those together because we lived in a house in the country that the snow came through the walls. Those quilts kept the snow off you, especially because of the rubber backing.
Yeah.
Oh man, getting up to pee in the middle of the night and oh, that would be
Yeah.
cold.
Oh yeah. I mean, I almost feel like you just learn how to hold it because you do not
I'm
want to have. You want to get out
I
of
don't
that bed
know.
as little as possible. Well, and also the thing
Exactly.
is, like, it's not like you were necessarily trekking out to the outhouse. You probably had a chamber pot. So you may not have even necessarily had to get far from the bed, but still. Ugh. Let's see. I like the comments about the upholstery swatch quilt. It reminded me of something I read about Freeman shotgun houses using quilts almost. Yes, Muradim, absolutely. Not just Freeman. My grandmother's house when she was growing up was the same way. It was a dog trot, and her mother, like the first quilts she made, were not just for the bed but also for the walls. That's what you did. Even when you're talking about like a nice, well built log cabin, if you don't have modern, drywall and stuff, there
Well,
are
these quilts with rubber seem to make a lot of sense to put on the
yeah
walls and on the
yeah.
floors because of the rubber. Oh my God, it's already 9:15.
I
Let
know.
me,
That's why
I
I'm like,
also
we gotta
wanted,
speed this up. We're never gonna
yeah,
get through it.
I wanted to bring up here on page 22, where, in the first column there, we'd go,
Oh yeah, this is
this is
something.
Mary
Uh huh.
Woodward. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we'd go after they'd turn it loose from picking and take a scrap of cotton. Then we'd lay it down where it would be warm in front of the stove and warm it, and you can push the seed out. So, what other reading were we reading where there was reference to
I
warming cotton
I
first?
think it was soft covers for hard times. And when I read this, I have it highlighted because I read this. I was like, oh gosh. And I'm the jerk who said it probably was because their fingers were warm. Like it was easier because you're sitting in front of the fire, your fingers were. Maybe there is something to this. Perhaps the cottonseed oil. It helps
Oh
release some of
yeah,
the warmth.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm so curious. So, of course, I have not yet done this, but it is getting warm. I mean, it's getting cold and it needs to be warm inside. Get my
You
husband
know
to
what?
put a little fire in the
I actually think it was Legacy.
Was it Legacy?
I think it was
No, I don't
Legacy.
think it was Legacy. She did, of course, talk about that in Legacy, but I want to say that it was because it was more recently than Legacy.
But it wasn't as recent as Soft Covers.
I'm gonna find it.
Unless you're thinking Legacy was a lot longer ago than it actually was.
I'll find it for next time. But in the meantime, when we need it to be warm in here, I'm gonna get my husband to make a little fire in the wood stove. I'm gonna lay out my remaining seeded cotton and see if it makes any difference.
I'm gonna say I still have a bunch. And then obviously on 23 here, I the discussion about the Sunbonnet Sue and the overall
I love that.
sample
Yes.
being adopted and adapted for regional dress
And the pictures are on the next page. I love Cuspuk Kate. She's the Inuit, the Alaskan. I love her. She's so adorable. But yeah, so I was interested about the history of this because she's got it in here. It says a pattern similar to Sunbonnet Sue. Mid 70s, Ladies Circle Needlework magazine, October 89 issue. Yeah, so that's been around a little bit longer than I thought it had, but the one with the women that have like the shawls. I'm trying to fold my book here. The one that's like got the yellow sashing. That's the one that I frequently see, and it was on the cover of Quilt Folk, and I can't remember which state it was. It might have been Minnesota. I can't remember what the state was. Hey, Jan. Yes, she said it was in one of the interviews in Soft Covers for Hard Times. I think I was right.
Then you know what? Then it has to be 3 times now because I remember it. I remember it a lot further back than that.
Well, I do remember in Legacy, like she did sit in front of the fire. She had to warm her joints up in front of the fire because I think she had.
No, it was something else. It was something else. I can look back at my notes. Maybe it's in my notes. But if that's the case, but like you were saying, is maybe you'll give it a try. I was gonna say, I think we have enough reference now that we should try it.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to.
Yeah.
So also on page 23 in the second column, she starts talking about Seminole patchwork. I am convinced that the Seminole patchwork is what led to modern strip quilting. Any kind of strip piecing stuff that people teach strip piecing to make quicker whatever. It was the Seminole patchwork that I think led to that. I think that people looked at how Seminole patchwork was created and went, oh, some of that looks like a good shortcut for just regular quilting. Seminole patchwork was probably my one and only experience with any kind of Native American tradition when I was a kid as it pertains to quilting, because my mom did study some of that stuff. But yeah, I mean, reading it, I was like, oh, okay. This is a lot more depth than I realized. But it's still very interesting. I'm hoping maybe she'll get into more of that later on. I'm not sure.
Well, the next thing from there is how on 25 she mentions that friendship quilts weren't really very popular, but then she brings up this particular one from the Hopland friendship quilt.
Yes, and that is on the picture of it's on page, what is it, 28?
And that's super problematic.
Oh, well, yeah, and the thing is, I'm not sure where these are from, if they're Aunt Martha or if they're from one of I think they might be one of the newspaper series. But yes, it's how horrifically ironic. We have this kind of not politically correct kind of imagery.
It's more so than not just politically correct, because she mentioned here one interesting early 20th century exception to not doing friendship quilts. is this Hopland friendship quilt.
Mm-hmm.
Made in 1928 by Pomo Indians who lived in Hopland, California.
Mm-hmm.
Now owned by the Mendocino County Museum, the quilt was a project instigated by teachers at the Hopland Ranchera School for Indian Children. We
Yeah,
already know that's a problem.
that's where I was
Blocks
going with
were
that.
Blocks were pre-printed with stenciled designs depicting colonial themes, such as Standish Answers Indians and Pocahontas Smith, or Eastern Plains Indian scenes were sent home with students to embroider and sign. One square was done by a famous pomo basket weaver, Elise Allen. Um, and I'm bummed that this quilt is hard to see more up close,
Yeah.
but how barbaric to send children home to embroider.
Yeah, that's where I was going with that. Yeah, I mean, you've got this politically incorrect imagery. That's where I was going with it. It's just, you know, back then I mean, these were released. If this was 1928, these were just released. Like, these were new in 1928. These were new drawings. So, but how insulting to be like, okay, well, here's this imagery of the colonialism that was forced upon you. Go home and get your parents to help you embroider this.
Well, and it's like,
what?
Again, as we mentioned earlier, you know, having these Indian schools be a way to erase identities and cultural memory and things like that. You know, have them embroider stuff that puts new cultural context into their being. I will say the block that is starting at the bottom. It's the second row, second into the left. It's an indigenous person holding a bow and arrow. I feel like I've seen that block a lot. What was one of the designers you were wondering if this was?
Aunt Martha or
Aunt Martha.
It's not Aunt Martha, though, I don't think. Actually, you know, we have a friend who has researched this particular thing a lot. We'll reach out to her and check. Cause I know she has the answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've definitely seen some of these.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I recognized it as soon as I started looking at it. I'm like, huh. And then there's the one. It's the image that it's like a penny with, I think it's like a spear and a sword or something crossed. That was what I zoomed in right away and was like, that's what these are. These are that set of colonial. And you know what? I do think it was in it was in the newspaper. It was a Nancy Page. Possibly Nancy Page. It was definitely newspapers, and it was aimed at children. They were aimed at children, and it was about, here's your colonial history lesson. You can color these, or you can trace them and embroider them. Like, there was, yeah. I think I'll double check with our resource, but I'm pretty sure that was the deal with those.
Well, wrapping up here. Anything else particular?
Yeah. So there was like one or two more things. So there was a couple things in here. Like I said, I did learn some things that I just didn't know.
Oh yeah.
So on page 25, kind of there at the middle, down at the bottom of the second column, it says because the number 4 has such deep symbolism for Native people. That was interesting to me. Now I know that there is kind of that 4. There's 4, like there's the medicine wheel, and there's the 4 colors, and then, you know, the 4 directions, and so it makes sense to me. But I was surprised. Like, I just, you know, because you think about Christian symbology. 3 is an important number in Christian symbology. So yeah, that was interesting to me. And then on page, let's see, skip ahead to page 30, the strawberries. I had no idea. And I'm. You know, I mean, she says that, let's see, is it Odawa and Ojibwa cultures, the strawberry is one of the first fruits to be gathered. So it figures prominently in the spring. Yeah, that was really interesting because, you know, East Coast, anytime you get any kind of like quote unquote Native American symbology, it's corn. You know, and I know corn was very important, at least here where I am, the Piscataway. Corn was very important to them, but it gets to a point where it's almost just like a cliche, you know, and you're like, corn, right? So it was so cool to me, like, oh, strawberries would be for, these groups. And I think Ojibwa, I mean, this is like the Midwest, right? Maybe northern Midwest. I'm terrible with geography and I'm terrible with remembering where each of the tribes that are like very well
I
known
think
names.
they're Michigan.
Is it Michigan?
Yeah, because she talks about them a lot. Like
Okay.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
she talks about them. I think it was the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
Okay. So, all right. Oh, and the one last thing I wanted to note was, and I think there's a picture earlier on, but it's on page 30 where it's mentioned, where Arena Palmer Wasco, she cuts out eagles from printed fabric to use as the center of her log cabin blocks. I love that because, the old, and I'm sure some people making log cabins do believe this, or it's their purpose. They do this for a purpose. But the fact that the log cabin uses a red center, it's supposed to be the hearth of the home. I love that she took that kind of, there's something in the middle is supposed to be symbolic, and I'm going to use this eagle that means something to me versus this, the hearth. I love that. And that to me is like, again, taking, you've had this forced on you, and I mean, I realize we're talking about contemporary quilters here, but you've had this craft forced upon you. What can you take and put into it that makes it your own, and it becomes a symbol of you yourself or your community versus, this just log cabin quilt. So I thought that was pretty neat.
Agreed.
So yeah, this is gonna be something. I I'm looking forward to getting into each of the individual. I guess they kind of get into each like geographic groups here, and Hawaiian quilting she has not touched upon a whole lot, but I know it does come up more extensively later in the book. So. I thought it was interesting how in here it said the Hawaiians originally, until sheep were introduced to use their wool, were using some type of fluffy stuff from a fern as batting.
Yep.
I love that. I thought that was really cool. And Quilt Folks Passport series, I did the Hawaiian one, and they had a woman that works with kappa, and she showed like making kappa, like literally from the plant to a piece of fabric, making the kappa. That was fascinating to me. And that all of like that, before the colonists showed up, like what did, needing a blanket look like to Native Hawaiians, and then how did that change once you've got the missionaries showing up and teaching them, bringing in cloth and stuff.
Druid's got a question for you.
Nervous ladies, volunteer quilters, or was it thrust upon them? In some cases it was thrust upon them and in some cases they were women that already knew how to sew, and they were encouraged to and I don't think he forced them to do anything. It was really about like, I think he kind of would offer people something, hey, why don't you do this, and they would do it if it worked out for them. And they found occupation for people everywhere, within the system he was using, which nowadays is a little bit more like what the psychiatric system looks like today than what it did through most of the 20th century.
Well, we've gone about a half an hour over tonight, but
it's a new book, and we had to.
There's a lot to talk about.
Yeah. We had to say a few things. So.
Yeah. So just as a reminder, next week, the 22nd, we'll do pages 32 through 67. It will take us 3 weeks just to get through this first chapter because there's a lot. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to unpack. And then we'll be moving on to the other articles in here. And then tomorrow we're Needlework Nights.
Yes, and I still have to take pictures of my measuring tapes.
I do too, but I've at least collected them.
Yeah, mine are for the most part all in one place, so all good.
So come on back here tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern for us to look at all manner of tape measures.
All right, then let me drum us out of here. I guess you probably don't want to see. Oh, where's my mouse? You probably don't want to see the cake TV thing. So we'll just be going with a regular old quilt screen to drum us out here, and look forward to seeing you guys hopefully tomorrow. If not, then we'll see you next week.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.